So like when you hear the word necromancer, you instantly think of a villain.
Oh, absolutely. Glowing red eyes, robes made of shadows.
Exactly. And, a literal army of skeletons just marching to conquer the realm.
Yeah.
It's this really classic, clean-cut fantasy trope.
Yeah, we all know exactly what to expect when that kind of character walks onto the battlefield.
Right. But what happens when you take those exact same dark mechanics like the manipulation of life and death and use them to play a hospice worker?
It is such a wild subversion.
It really is. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're exploring this profoundly compelling character build titled Cleric.pdf.
It's quite a document.
Yeah, and for you listening, I want to be clear that we aren't just looking at like a spreadsheet of optimized dice rolls today. We're looking at a masterclass in how game mechanics can fundamentally tell this heartbreaking, beautiful story about life, death, and memory.
It really is. And, for you, as someone who likely spends a lot of time analyzing tabletop mechanics, the truly fascinating part of this deep dive is how this build completely redefines the support role at a table.
Right, because we're so used to the cleric just being a walking first aid kit.
Basically, yeah. Just a dispensary for hit points. But this character treats their role entirely differently. I mean, they aren't just restoring HP.
They're restoring meaning.
Yes, exactly. They act as this emotional anchor for an entire party. And they navigate this incredibly murky gray landscape in a game that honestly usually demands binary choices.
Okay, let's unpack this. So the core concept here is an archetype known as the gentle necromancer. And right away, that title just creates friction, doesn't it?
Oh, total.
Because they're described not as a master of the undead, but as a caretaker of the boundary.
I love that phrasing.
Me too. They see death not as this ultimate terrifying failure state that, has to be avoided at all costs, but as a continuation of a relationship.
Which, that requires a completely different psychological baseline than your typical adventurer.
Right.
Before we even get into the class features or the stat arrays, we really have to look at the intention behind this character. They operate on this principle of ritual intimacy.
Ritual intimacy, wow.
Yeah, so every single action, whether that's casting a healing spell on a bruised rogue or, casting a necromancy spell to speak with a spirit, it's done with immense intention. It's never a reflex. It is always a ceremony.
And that kind of reframes the whole alignment conversation, too.
It really does.
Because playing a strictly neutral good or like true neutral character can sometimes feel a bit passive. But here it's a very active choice.
Absolutely.
I mean, they prioritize helping people, yes, but they also prioritize the delicate balance between life and death.
Yeah, their core philosophy really drives everything. Death is not inherently evil. And this is maybe more surprising for a tabletop game where characters die all the time. Resurrection is not always right.
Wait, really? They turn down resurrections?
Yeah. They believe every soul has a story, and sometimes that story is simply finished.
Wow. Instead of a necromancer acting like this biological hacker trying to exploit the system of death for their own gain, this character feels more like a dedicated archivist.
That's a great way to put it.
Or, honestly, a grief counselor. Someone treating the dead with the exact same profound respect that they offer the living. I mean, even their fantasy titles reflect this.
Oh, the aliases are amazing. Grave Listener, Shepherd of the Quiet, Memory Weaver.
Keeper of Unfinished Stories. Just incredible.
What's fascinating here is how they root that whole philosophy right into their backstory. They use the acolyte background, but they don't play it as the obedient zealot.
Right, they're a reflavored acolyte.
Exactly. They were raised in a rigid, deeply orthodox faith, but they're quietly questioning the very foundations of it. But they didn't, storm out of the temple and become a paladin of vengeance.
Right. They
stayed to reinterpret the dogma. They look at the strict rules of their deity and interpret that doctrine through empathy, rather than just blind obedience.
And the character notes pose this incredible, haunting question that they continually ask themselves, right? If faith demands the innocent fall, is it faith at all?
It's so good. They live completely in the threshold. They bridge the gap between life and death, but also between faith and doubt, and, between healing and letting go.
Which is a massive amount of tension to bring to a typical adventuring party.
Oh, absolutely. They aren't feared by townsfolk because they're evil. They're feared because they refuse to simplify what society desperately wants to label as definitively wrong.
People want death to be the enemy.
Right.
And this character sits beside death and calls it a neighbor.
Sits beside death, yes.
I love that. But here's the rub. I get the psychology, but mechanically, a tabletop game is basically a combat simulator. So how does this gentle approach actually survive a dungeon run?
That is the big question.
Let's talk about the character sheet. The foundation of this build starts with their species. They're human, using the 2024 rule set, and it is heavily emphasized that they are decidedly ordinary.
Very ordinary.
Yeah, they weren't born touched by shadow magic. They aren't cursed by a dark god. They deliberately chose to walk this uncomfortable path.
Which makes their choice of class a level 5 cleric in the grave domain so poignant, because the grave domain focuses heavily on the boundary of life and death, but mechanically, it's really about preventing the abuse of death.
Right.
Their features completely reinforce this. They get Circle of Mortality, making their healing magic drastically more effective on someone who is at 0 hit points.
And they get Eyes of the Grave to sense restless undead, right, but not to control them, to understand what's wrong in the environment.
Exactly. And they get Path to the Grave, which curses an enemy to take double damage from an ally's next strike.
And it's how they use their spell list that really translates this concept to the table. Every spell feels like a conversation.
Yeah, usually players just shout, "I cast Cure Wounds," and roll the dice.
Totally. But here, Healing Word and Cure Wounds are role-played as this gentle, immediate care. Spare the Dying isn't just mechanical stabilization. It's a profound refusal to let someone slip away alone in the dark.
That's so powerful. And Gentle Repose is used to show deep respect for the physical body of the dead, preserving it carefully.
And Speak with Dead. This is brilliant. They don't use it as an interrogation tool to get the password to the Goblin King's vault.
No, not at all.
They use it to listen to dying confessions.
That narrative choice is perfectly mirrored in how they built their stat array, too. Like, they've dumped strength entirely. It's an 8.
They fundamentally do not impose their physical will on the world.
Right. Instead, they prioritize a high wisdom of 16 and a constitution of 14. They aren't built to kick down doors or intimidate guards.
Yeah.
They're built solely to endure suffering and interpret it. Their high wisdom means deep, profound empathy. And their constitution means they actually have the physical endurance to sit beside that immense suffering without, collapsing under the weight of it.
That makes so much sense. Even their dexterity is a flat 10. They just move with this deliberate, calm neutrality.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting to me, because I kind of have to push back on one specific mechanical choice.
Oh.
Yeah. So as a human, they get a bonus feat,
Hmm?
right? And they intentionally take the healer feat. Mechanically, why would a magical cleric, someone who can literally knit flesh back together with divine energy, take a mundane physical first aid feat?
It seems weird, right?
Isn't that totally redundant, like you're burning a valuable feat on something your class already does better?
Well, from a pure min-maxing perspective, sure, it seems totally redundant, but narratively, it is the anchor of the entire character.
How so?
It shows that care requires physical action, not just a magical shortcut.
Yeah.
They believe that not everything requires invoking the divine.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, sometimes sitting down, tearing a bandage, cleaning a wound with water, and physically tending to a friend is vastly more intimate and grounding than just waving a holy symbol.
Oh.
It makes them feel deeply human. It grounds their supernatural connection to death in a very tangible, messy reality.
Care through action, that's beautiful. It prevents them from feeling like just a detached magical battery.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes total sense. So, taking all of this, the stat dumping, the specific spell flavor, the physical healing kit, how does this actually play at the table? Because that philosophy of do no harm must cause massive friction. The second swords are drawn and initiative is rolled.
It creates an incredibly unique playstyle. The notes actually outline their combat approach as preserve, witness, intervene.
Preserve, witness, intervene. Okay.
They aren't trying to win the fight in the traditional sense. They're constantly analyzing the battlefield to decide who must live and who is already lost.
Ah, I see.
And because of that grave domain feature, Circle of Mortality, they play a very dangerous game with their healing. The feature maximizes healing dice, but only if the target is at exactly 0 hit points.
Right.
So they actually wait. They hold on to their spell slots, they let their allies dip incredibly low, waiting for the exact moment they drop unconscious, just to bring them back up with maximal efficiency.
See, I get the philosophy, but at a practical table, that is a massive gamble.
Oh, it is.
You're essentially playing chicken with your ally's life. You're the healer, and you're just watching the fighter take a massive hit, knowing you could have topped them off a turn ago.
Yeah, if you miscalculate the initiative order, or if the boss has a multi-attack, your friend is rolling death saves. Or worse, they're just outright dead. You're absolutely right. And it requires an immense amount of trust between the players at the table.
It has to.
But the notes describe this exact tension as having a quiet boldness in that restraint. They do not panic heal. They don't waste emotional or magical energy on a scrape when they know a fatal blow is coming.
So they just trust their allies to endure, just like their high constitution allows them to endure.
Exactly. And offensively, they use Path to the Grave to expose an enemy's vulnerability. They don't swing the mace themselves, they mark the enemy's fate, and then step back so an ally can deliver the final blow.
Not everything should be saved, but everything should be understood. That's their overarching combat philosophy.
Yes.
And that restraint bleeds right into how they handle exploration, too. The notes subtitle this section, Listen to What Lingers.
Such a good title.
Right. In a typical dungeon crawl, the rogue is checking for traps, and the barbarian is looking for loot, this cleric. They move beside or slightly behind the group.
Yeah, they're drawn to ruins and gravesides.
And they use their perception skill to notice subtle environmental disturbances, their insight to read the emotional residue left behind in a room, and medicine to interpret bodies.
They don't just search a corpse for loose gold.
No. They treat a corpse like a text that needs to be read and understood.
Which perfectly sets up their role in social encounters, right? They are the quiet listener.
The quiet listener.
With a low strength and average dexterity, they aren't intimidating anyone at the tavern, and they certainly aren't performing sleight of hand to impress a crowd. They rely heavily on insight rather than persuasion.
So they don't dominate conversations, but they disarm people softly.
Exactly. They become the one who holds the moral tension in the group. They comfort NPCs while simultaneously challenging their assumptions. They ask the quiet questions that make the paladin, stop and think before charging in.
It's just incredibly cohesive. But we know how these campaigns go. Characters level up, the stakes get higher, and dealing with life and death on a cosmic scale every single day changes a person.
Oh, for sure.
At level 5, you're dealing with local bandits and crypt ghouls. How does this cleric evolve as they reach the higher tiers of play, specifically around level 12 when they start touching godlike power?
The shift is profound. They move from being a reactive ground-level healer to what the notes call an arbiter of fate and a life anchor.
Arbiter of fate. That sounds heavy.
It is. At level 6, they get a grave domain feature called Sentinel at Death's Door. Mechanically, as a reaction, they can turn an enemy's devastating critical hit against an ally into a normal hit.
Wow.
Thematically, this is them literally interrupting death itself. They are standing there, watching fate try to claim their friend, and they just whisper, "Not yet."
I love how that recontextualizes a simple die roll. A natural 20 usually means the DM gets to describe a brutal cinematic injury, but this character steps in and edits the narrative in real time.
It's so cool.
And their Destroy Undead feature evolves too, right? Normally, that's just a holy nuke that turns lower-level zombies to ash.
Right. But instead of destroying them out of a sense of righteous holy hatred, they view it as an act of mercy. They're forcibly releasing trapped souls that were bound into undeath against their will.
And their spell selection at higher levels reflects this heavy new burden, doesn't it?
It does. They get Death Ward, which preemptively denies death before it even strikes. And they use Spirit Guardians, which is normally one of the most powerful damage-dealing spells for a cleric.
Right, usually a swarm of aggressive glowing angels smiting your foes.
Exactly. But instead of angels, the spell is flavored as the faint, silent silhouettes of the specific spirits they've remembered along their journey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these spirits surround the party as if to say, you are not alone here. The damage the spell deals isn't holy fire, it's the overwhelming emotional weight of memory.
That is incredible. And the magic items they accumulate tell the exact same story. Like, they carry an amulet of the devout, but they treat it as a symbol of their chosen belief, not blind temple faith.
Right.
They wear a periapt of wound closure, making them physically harder to kill simply because they refuse to abandon their party. But the absolute best detail is a non-magical flavor item they carry. The Journal of the Departed. They use it to record the names of the dead, the final words they hear when they cast Speak with Dead, and this is the heavy part, they record the reasons they chose not to resurrect someone.
It's so intense, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the social shift here is massive. By level 12, they have become the absolute moral compass of the group. The notes call them the one who names the cost.
Right, because earlier at level 5, They were basically an emergency room doctor. They were doing triage, stabilizing the bleeding, keeping the rogue breathing after a bad trap.
Yeah, exactly.
But by level 12, they've been promoted to the hospital ethics board. They have access to the raise dead spell. They can pull a soul back across the veil of the afterlife.
The stakes are completely different.
The gravity of that power means they aren't just fixing broken bones anymore. They're deciding if a procedure should even happen.
That analogy is spot on. The moment they get access to raise dead, they become the keeper of consequences. They might literally stop the party from rushing a resurrection. When the party drags an essential NPC's body back to camp, demanding the cleric fix it, the cleric might require a moment of silence first.
Wow.
Yeah, they might ask the party for consent on behalf of the dead person, asking, "You can bring him back, but will he thank you for it?"
Man, it demands an incredibly mature table to roleplay that well. And to really tie all these mechanical and philosophical threads together, the notes actually provide a specific narrative scene.
Yes.
A masterclass in how to play this archetype at the table. It takes place in a ruined chapel, and it perfectly encapsulates all the friction we've been talking about.
Yes, the ruined chapel scene. So picture this at your table. The party is battered. They just survived a brutal fight in this ash-covered sanctuary, and in the center of the room, they find a dead knight.
Okay.
They quickly realize this knight wasn't an enemy. The knight was guarding something. The seal to a crypt below the chapel has been broken, and whatever killed the knight is still lurking nearby.
So the tension is super high.
Exactly. The party is panicking, arguing about whether to barricade the doors or run. Naturally, the fighter looks at our gentle necromancer, expecting the standard protocol, and asks, "Can you bring them back?"
And the cleric doesn't immediately reach for their diamond dust. They don't say a word at first. They just kneel beside the knight. First action, they cast gentle repose.
Right.
They place a hand on the knight's chest to pause the biological clock on the body, whispering, "You've held this place long enough."
Which is so respectful.
But the rest of the party is likely frustrated, like, "We don't have time for a funeral." But the cleric ignores them and takes their second action. Speak with dead.
And the cleric tells the corpse, "If there's something unfinished, I can carry it."
Oh, chills.
And the dead knight reveals a massive twist to the party. He was the one who broke the seal to the crypt, not the monsters.
Wait, really?
Yeah, why? Because the Forgotten were calling from below, and he just couldn't ignore them anymore.
The Forgotten. Okay, so the spell ends, the knight's spirit fades, and the party turns back to the cleric. Okay, we have the intel, can you bring them back now?
Right.
And the cleric looks at the body, looks down at the broken crypt, and says, "We could." But they didn't fail. They chose to listen when no one else would.
And the fighter argues, "But they died."
And the cleric just nods and says, "Yes." That doesn't always mean it was wrong, and they outright refuse to resurrect the knight.
And then the crypt erupts.
Of course it does.
The undead pour out. Combat begins, and suddenly we see everything we discussed mechanically working in tandem with the narrative.
Oh, I love this part.
The cleric steps back. They cast spirit guardians. Those faint, sorrowful silhouettes fill the room. The fighter is about to take a massive critical hit from an undead champion, and the cleric burns their reaction to use Sentinel at death's door.
Weakening the blow and keeping the fighter standing.
Exactly. The rogue, however, drops to 0 HP. The cleric waits for their turn, and then calmly uses Circle of Mortality to maximize a healing word, bringing the rogue right back into the fight.
And then the boss monster emerges. A terrifying, undead amalgamation.
Yeah.
The cleric doesn't attack it with a mace. They step forward, look at this creature, and whisper, "You don't have to stay like this." And they cast Path to the Grave.
The vulnerability is set.
The fighter follows up with a massive strike, doubling the damage, and the monster falls. And the battle ends. And the cleric just walks back to the dead knight, sits beside him, and simply uses their physical hands to close his eyes as a kindness.
It's beautiful.
So what does this all mean? In a game that is traditionally about min-maxing your damage output and just clearing the board of enemies, this character fundamentally redefines what a victory actually looks like.
This scene perfectly demonstrates all three pillars of the game working in absolute harmony.
It really does.
They used Speak with Dead in the exploration phase to uncover the hidden truth of the environment. They made a morally complex social decision by refusing to resurrect someone who had found their own tragic peace.
Right.
And they used their combat mechanics to control the flow of fate, enabling their allies to survive without ever swinging a weapon themselves.
Yeah.
The cleric doesn't just help the party win the fight mechanically, they help the party understand what winning actually means in the context of life and death.
The Cleric.pdf document proves how a character sheet isn't just like a math problem to solve.
Yeah.
An 8 in strength and a 16 in wisdom, the deliberate choice of a physical healer feat, the specific empathetic flavor applied to standard spells, it's not just table strategy.
No, 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 no.
It is the vocabulary used to build a profoundly real character. A character whose ultimate philosophy is basically this: life is not mine to give, death is not mine to take, but I will stand between them as long as I am able.
This raises such an important question, and it's something I really want you to think about after this deep dive ends. We started by talking about how we expect fantasy and, frankly, reality to be binary.
Alive or dead, a success or a failure.
Exactly. But this character believes that memory is a form of continuation. If that's true, how does that change the way you view the forgotten in your own life?
Oh, wow.
Are there unfinished stories or quiet histories around you right now that just need someone willing to stop, sit beside them, and finally listen?
What a thought to end on. Thank you to you, the listener, for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for the profound stories hiding inside the mechanics of everyday life. We'll see you next time.